Let's dive into a brand new, expanded look at Scarface, 1983, the gritty crime epic that continues to dazzle and disturb audiences all these years later. We'll be exploring 30 key facts, and then some, about this legendary film, weaving in fresh details from reputable sources like Variety, the Miami Herald, The Guardian, and more. Although we're breaking it down into 30 points for clarity, consider this one flowing story of ambition, violence, and neon-lit swagger, ready for a voiceover in a single take. Buckle up, because we're about to revisit every bit of the original info, but in an even bigger, bolder way. Scarface as a remake. Scarface, 1983, directed by Brian De Palma, is often hailed as one of the most ferocious gangster movies ever. But did you know it's a remake of the 1932 film Scarface, directed by Howard Hawks? Back in the 1930s, Paul Muni played a Chicago gangster inspired by Al Capone during Prohibition. Fast forward 5 decades, and the 1983 version transplants that ruthless energy to the sizzling streets of Miami, right in the middle of the city's cocaine explosion. Sources like David Thompson's film writings describe how this shift to South Florida in the early 80s gave the story a pulsating new relevance, reflecting the era's intense focus on drug trafficking. Whereas the original film was set in a dark, cold Chicago swarming with Tommy guns and flappers, the new Scarface made full use of sun-scorched beaches, neon Art Deco facades, and sweltering nights filled with disco music. It's a perfect example of how reimagining a classic can yield something that feels both familiar and radically different. Al Pacino's relentless pursuit. Al Pacino is the beating heart of Scarface, and it was his obsession with rebooting the 1932 classic that got the project rolling. According to producer Martin Bregman in a 1984 interview with the Los Angeles Times, Pacino caught the original Scarface at a revival theater in L.A. and immediately saw potential in a modern retelling, especially one that would spotlight the immigrant's quest for wealth and respect. Pacino's determination practically dragged everyone else along. He wanted the story to be big, brash, and unrestrained. Scholars like David Thompson note that Pacino's personal connection to ambitious, volatile characters, think Serpico, Michael Corleone, gave him the perfect skill set to portray Tony Montana. Once the actor latched onto the idea, there was no going back. Scarface was destined to be a glitzy, blood-soaked tour of the American dream gone horribly wrong. Sidney Lumet's departure. Initially, legendary director Sidney Lumet, famous for socially conscious films like 12 Angry Men and Serpico, had been lined up to helm Scarface. He wanted to tackle it as a heavy political commentary on Reagan's anti-drug policies, suggesting a more direct condemnation of the socio-political environment of the 1980s. But Martin Bregman was uneasy about pivoting the film into a quasi-documentary rant against U.S. policy, and the two men had creative differences. Lumet walked. That paved the way for Brian De Palma, whose cinematic style is known for grand operatic flourishes and unflinching violence. Witness Carrie or Dressed to Kill. With De Palma on board, the film took on an over-the-top, almost Shakespearean tone, ensuring Tony Montana's saga was as dramatic and explosive as possible. Variety published an interview in 1983 noting how the director dialed up every element, violence, language, visual flair, to make Scarface a grim, mesmerizing spectacle. Oliver Stone's personal battle. The screenplay was penned by Oliver Stone, who was battling a serious cocaine addiction at the time. According to a 1996 conversation Stone had with Creative Screenwriting, he realized he couldn't write a story about drug-fueled mania while stuck in Hollywood, so he escaped to Paris to quit cocaine and maintain objectivity. Paradoxically, Stone's own struggle heightened the screenplay's authenticity. He poured real-life anxiety and desperation into the narrative, giving Scarface a potent sense of dread. When you watch Tony Montana build his empire on mountains of cocaine, you're essentially seeing Stone wrestle with his personal demons, transformed into a cinematic carnival of greed and self-destruction. Inspiration from real cocaine cowboys. Though Stone's script is fictional, it was influenced by real Miami drug lords like Willie Falcon and Sal Magluta, dubbed the Cocaine Cowboys in local media such as the Miami Herald. These Cuban-American traffickers oversaw sprawling smuggling operations, amassing flashy cars and massive mansions, just like Tony Montana. Their exploits terrified authorities and fascinated Hollywood. In referencing these real-life figures, Scarface achieved a layer of credibility that made Tony's rise from dishwasher to kingpin feel only too plausible. According to contemporary newspaper reports, Miami in the late 70s and early 80s was awash in drug money, everything from high-powered speedboats to entire nightclubs built on a foundation of illegal cash. Scarface soaked up that environment and held a neon mirror to it, letting audiences gape at a life few people ever see up close. The X-rating controversy. Scarface famously tangled with the MPAA over its violence and relentless profanity. Brian De Palma recalled to the Washington Post that the initial cut landed an X rating, something that basically guaranteed commercial disaster. De Palma grudgingly trimmed the blood and gore in places, particularly in the chainsaw scene, and on the third try, the film squeaked by with an R. However, rumor persists, as The Guardian once noted in a retrospective, that De Palma sneakily submitted the exact same version each time, convinced the MPAA's confusion would eventually give him an R. Whether that's entirely accurate or not, the controversy juiced public curiosity, turning Scarface's violence into a selling point. Crowds flocked to see what the fuss was about, and they were not disappointed. Powdered milk and inositol. Tony Montana and his cronies are seen snorting mountains of cocaine, but the production team used powdered milk or inositol, a vitamin supplement, to stand in for the real stuff. Al Pacino has recounted in GQ interviews how repeatedly inhaling these powders under bright lights for hours a day irritated his nasal passages. Even harmless substances can become harmful if you breathe them in non-stop, so that constant discomfort might have fueled Pacino's authenticity, contributing to Tony Montana's perpetually edgy, strung-out vibe. This dedication to realism might be why the final film resonates so powerfully, even at its most outrageous. Pacino's burnt hand. During the epic final shootout, Pacino grabbed the scorching barrel of a prop gun that had been firing blanks. The incident left him with severe hand burns and forced production to halt for 2 weeks. Entertainment Weekly cited this as one of the more dramatic behind-the-scenes stories, pointing to Pacino's all-in approach. He never hesitated to fling himself fully into every action scene, risking personal injury for the sake of capturing Tony's feral intensity. While it cost valuable production time, it also speaks to the passion swirling around Scarface. No one was simply phoning it in on set. Steven Spielberg's secret shot. An especially fun tidbit from the set is that Steven Spielberg dropped by to watch De Palma work during the climactic mansion assault. Word around the crew, later shared in various film blogs and The Hollywood Reporter, is that Spielberg directed at least one camera angle during the shoot, capturing a henchman climbing Tony's massive fortress walls. Spielberg's cameo involvement is uncredited, but it highlights the camaraderie among Hollywood's new wave directors. Imagine 2 titans, one behind Jaws and E.T., the other behind Carrie, casually collaborating for a moment. It's just one of those behind-the-scenes gems that elevates Scarface's legend, the Michelle Pfeiffer gamble. Casting. Michelle Pfeiffer as Elvira Hancock was contentious at first. De Palma and Pacino were reportedly interested in more established names, like Glenn Close, or considered stars such as Gina Davis, Carrie Fisher, and Sharon Stone. But Pfeiffer's audition was so electrifying, particularly when she accidentally shattered a plate and cut Pacino, that the filmmakers realized they'd found someone who could embody the frosty glamour of the 1980s Miami drug scene. Pfeiffer's portrayal of Elvira, the jaded trophy wife who's bored with cocaine-drenched hedonism, turned out to be pivotal. Critics initially overlooked her performance, but over time, many film historians have come to see her as a crucial pillar in Scarface's success. The Guardian, in a 2018 profile, praised Pfeiffer's steely elegance, calling her one of the decade's most magnetic screen presences. The infamous plate incident. During that very audition, Pfeiffer shattered a prop dish, causing a shard to fly up and nick Al Pacino. Instead of panicking or breaking character, she carried on with the same icy determination that Elvira herself might have shown. According to Martin Bregman, that moment sealed the deal. The crew realized Pfeiffer had that dangerous grace needed for Elvira, a mix of aloof disdain and simmering inner turmoil. A 1984 Los Angeles Times feature on the making of Scarface recounted how Pfeiffer's unexpected energy shifted the entire audition room's atmosphere. Looking back, it's hard to imagine anyone else capturing Elvira's fragile, brittle essence quite so perfectly. Stephen Bauer's effortless casting. In stark contrast, Stephen Bauer landed the role of Manny Ribera almost effortlessly. Casting director Alex Gordon spotted him and convinced De Palma and Bregman he had the right blend of Cuban heritage, swagger, and easygoing warmth. Bauer's Manny offers a friendly counterpoint to Tony's severe ambition, bringing laughter and genuine camaraderie to a narrative often soaked in blood. Decades later, Bauer mentioned in interviews, including one with a Miami-based news outlet, that Manny's dynamic with Tony was one of the most enjoyable aspects of filming. After all, Manny's comedic lines and affectionate jabs let viewers see a spark of humanity in Tony's life before everything spirals downward. Miami's Cuban community backlash. Although Scarface is famously set in Miami, the production had to shift most of its shooting to Los Angeles due to protests from Miami's Cuban community. Organizations feared that showing exiles as psychopathic drug runners would perpetuate negative stereotypes. The Miami Herald covered these protests, describing how local leaders objected to the script's portrayal of Cuban Americans. Intense demonstrations led De Palma to recreate Miami via elaborate sets in L.A., complete with imported palm trees and pastel-hued buildings. This pivot might have been a blessing in disguise. It allowed the filmmakers to construct an entire Miami underworld on their own terms, crafting a stylized cityscape that emphasized Scarface's heightened tone. The real chainsaw horror. The chainsaw scene remains one of the most disturbing moments in Scarface, a gory, nerve-shredding spectacle that happens early in Tony's rise. Remarkably, Oliver Stone got the idea from a real-life incident uncovered during his research with the DEA. Rolling Stone magazine interviewed Stone about how he'd heard of an actual Miami drug lord who used a chainsaw to dismember an informant. Stone took this horrifying anecdote and stuck it near the front of the movie, establishing early on that Tony's world is governed by ruthless violence. The scene practically branded itself onto 1980s pop culture, prompting countless parodies, but also cementing Scarface's reputation for pushing the boundaries of mainstream cinema's comfort zone. Yayo and street vernacular. During that chainsaw scene, Al Pacino ad-libbed the slang word yayo for cocaine. Brian De Palma heard him say it and decided it added a layer of authenticity to Tony's streetwise persona. Yayo caught on quickly with audiences, fans quote it to this day, and you'll hear it in songs referencing Scarface. Pacino's ability to slip Cuban slang into his lines underscores how committed he was to capturing Tony's swaggering style. In effect, a single improvised word helped root the film more deeply in the real language and vibe of Miami's drug culture. A flurry of F-bombs. Scarface's script unleashes the word fuck 226 times, averaging 1.32 times per minute. According to the New York Times, that statistic set a new high watermark for profanity in mainstream cinema at the time. Oliver Stone's unfiltered dialogue and Tony's unhinged rants forced the MPAA to consider whether the film's language alone warranted an X rating, never mind the violence. Ironically, the heavy use of profanity became part of Scarface's gritty charm, tempting curious moviegoers to see if it was as hardcore as the rumors suggested. Tony Montana's namesake, Joe Montana, Oliver Stone has admitted, in an ESPN interview, that he borrowed the surname Montana from NFL quarterback Joe Montana. It's an odd place to find inspiration for a bloodthirsty gangster, but Stone saw a parallel in the unstoppable drive, the need to be the best at all costs. As a result, the name Tony Montana has become one of the most iconic gangster aliases in film history, right up there with Vito Corleone and Tommy DeVito. Sports fans get a small kick out of the fact that the moniker came from such a wholesome source in the midst of such a violent narrative. Say hello to my little friend. No line in Scarface has been quoted, parodied, or memed as much as "Say hello to my little friend," shouted by Tony as he opens fire with his M16 in the mansion's final showdown. Contrary to rumors that Pacino improvised it on the spot, Oliver Stone actually wrote it in the script. However, Pacino's raw, unbridled delivery propelled it into pop culture immortality. Over the decades, everything from cartoons to comedic monologues have lampooned that iconic moment, proving how deeply Scarface has penetrated our cultural lexicon. Saddam Hussein's strange admiration. In one of Scarface's more bizarre real-world connections, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein named a money-laundering front Montana Management after Tony Montana's fictional financial empire. Multiple news reports in the 1990s noted this unsettling tribute, which underscores how Tony Montana's brazen pursuit of power fascinated even real-world tyrants. The Washington Post briefly mentioned Hussein's peculiar infatuation, highlighting how the story of a ruthless outsider building a lavish empire has resonated in corners of the globe you'd never expect. Influenced by Meryl Streep. Al Pacino has pointed to Meryl Streep's performance in Sophie's Choice as a guiding inspiration for how he portrayed Tony Montana. Interviewed by The Hollywood Reporter, Pacino mentioned he was struck by the emotional intensity and accent work in Streep's depiction of a Polish immigrant. Borrowing a page from her approach, he sought to make Tony's Cuban background integral to every gesture and line delivery. That's part of why Tony feels like such a complete character. He's not just a gangster stereotype, but an outsider whose ambition is fed by the sting of cultural and economic exclusion. Spanish only on set. To add yet another layer of immersion, Pacino requested that cinematographer John A. Alonzo, who was of Mexican heritage, speak only Spanish to him while filming. This forced Pacino to continually practice Tony's Cuban accent and remain in a Spanish-language mindset, even behind the scenes. Whether or not that accent is perfect has been debated by native Cuban speakers, but there's no doubt Pacino attempted to stay in character. BBC Culture once noted that this method approach, while unusual, contributed to the film's overall intensity. Tony always feels like he's operating on the margins of mainstream American society. Box office challenges. Despite all the hype and controversy, Scarface's box office performance was underwhelming at first. Its production budget ranged somewhere between $23 million and $37 million, sources vary, yet it only raked in about $66 million worldwide. That placed it at a modest 16th place for 1983 and 7th among R-rated movies that year. Critics were divided. Pauline Kael offered mixed feelings, praising De Palma's flair but bemoaning the unrelenting violence. Initially, Scarface wasn't a runaway smash, but it slowly gathered momentum through home video. According to a 1987 box office report, its VHS sales went through the roof, eventually cementing Scarface as a cult classic that new generations discovered on their TV screens. Giorgio Moroder's electric score. The pulsating, synth-laden score by Giorgio Moroder plays a massive role in Scarface's vibe. Moroder, known for disco hits with Donna Summer, gave the film a throbbing electronic edge, exemplified by tracks like She's on Fire and Tony's Theme. Some critics back in 1983 derided the soundtrack as too cold or soulless, but in hindsight, it's become a hallmark of the movie's over-the-top 1980s aesthetic. NME placed the Scarface soundtrack among the influential pop scores of the era, noting how it matched the neon visuals and fueled the sense of unstoppable momentum behind Tony's rise and ultimate crash. De Palma's Blink and You Miss It cameo, fans of auteur filmmaking can spot Brian De Palma himself lurking in a fleeting reflection during the Babylon Club sequence right before chaos erupts. It's a subtle nod, reminiscent of Alfred Hitchcock's tradition of popping up in his own films. Unless you know exactly when to pause, you'll likely miss De Palma's cameo. While overshadowed by the disco glitz and eventual gunfire, this Easter egg is a fun reminder that the director was fully immersed in every second of Scarface's outlandish style. Filming Miami in Los Angeles, though Miami is practically a character in the movie, with its heat, multicultural flair, and pastel exteriors, very little actual footage was shot there. De Palma had to relocate to L.A. after Cuban-American groups in Miami staged protests, fearing that Scarface would vilify their community. Production designers meticulously transformed various Los Angeles neighborhoods into facsimiles of South Beach, hauling in palm trees and repainting buildings. According to a 1984 Los Angeles Times feature, this gave De Palma more control over the environment, helping him craft the heightened color palette that saturates the film. Tony's unsettling obsession with Gina. One of the film's more disturbing aspects is Tony's near-incestuous possessiveness toward his sister, Gina. The dynamic was carried over from the 1932 Scarface, where the main character also displayed a fixation on his sister. Some audiences view Tony's behavior as mere overprotectiveness. Others see it as evidence of deeper psychological dysfunction. There are blog posts and fan theories galore dissecting how Tony's mania for control extends to Gina in unhealthy ways, underscoring how absolute power corrupts not just a man's morality, but also his familial relationships. The 20th anniversary hip-hop soundtrack. By the early 2000s, Scarface had become a staple reference in hip-hop culture, influencing everything from album artwork to rap lyrics. Indeed, artists like Jay-Z, Nas, and the late Notorious B.I.G. have alluded to Tony Montana's unstoppable hustle. When the film reached its 20th anniversary in 2003, there were proposals to re-release it with a hip-hop soundtrack. However, Brian De Palma staunchly refused to replace Giorgio Moroder's original score, wanting to preserve the authentic 1980s feel. MTV News reported that some fans were disappointed, but many others felt that messing with Moroder's pulsing beats would be a betrayal of Scarface's identity. The video game legacy. Scarface's influence on gaming is huge. The 2006 title, Scarface, The World Is Yours, posits a what-if scenario. Tony survives the final shootout and fights to regain control of his empire. Players roam an open-world environment reminiscent of Grand Theft Auto, Vice City, another game heavily shaped by Scarface, right down to the pastel suits and palm-fringed vistas. Another release, Scarface, Money, Power, Respect, brought the gangster empire-building formula to handheld consoles. These games let fans be Tony Montana, experiencing the dangerous allure of becoming an all-powerful kingpin in a sun-soaked criminal underworld. Eddie Murphy's stamp of approval. Scarface wasn't universally acclaimed by critics. Some called it tasteless and excessively violent. But at the 1983 premiere, comedian Eddie Murphy was vocally impressed by its raw energy. According to a 1983 piece by The Hollywood Reporter, Murphy praised De Palma for not pulling any punches. It's interesting that while many established critics were clutching their pearls, a new generation of entertainers found Scarface's outrageousness refreshing. That kind of high-profile support, along with word-of-mouth buzz, kept the film from slipping into obscurity during its initial theatrical run, ascending to cult phenomenon. Over the years, Scarface evolved from a controversial cinematic outlier into a pop culture heavyweight. Home video was the launch pad for its ascent, as VHS copies circulated among fans who memorized lines like, "Say hello to my little friend." Entire rap albums paid homage, and references popped up in everything from comedic skits to runway fashion. Grand Theft Auto, Vice City arguably served as an interactive love letter to the film's style, fueling further interest among younger gamers who might not otherwise have watched a decades-old crime movie. By the mid-2000s, Scarface was considered a cinematic Bible for those enamored with stories of meteoric success and tragic downfall. Even the New York Times took note of Scarface's pop culture revival, describing it as the gangland version of the Horatio Alger myth. Today, Tony Montana stands as a symbol, part cautionary tale, part rebellious icon, for dreamers who either admire or recoil from his brutal climb to power. Scarface's journey, launching as a polarizing gangster flick, facing an X rating, getting hammered by critics, then achieving cult superstardom, reads like its own rags-to-riches story. Every detail, from Al Pacino's scorched hand to the cameo shot by Steven Spielberg, adds texture to a movie that remains electrifying decades after Tony Montana let loose that avalanche of bullets and expletives. Scarface no longer belongs solely to De Palma, Pacino, or Oliver Stone. It's become a cultural artifact that people interpret, quote, mimic, and debate. With its blend of cautionary morality tale and operatic spectacle, it endures as a testament to how ambition can ignite both dreams and disasters, often in the same breath. And that, in the end, is why Scarface still sits on the throne of cinematic infamy, reminding us that the American dream, when pursued without limits or scruples, can curdle into a nightmare cloaked in neon and gunfire.